So at this time, I'm going to introduce Tokala to take us on this next section of our presentation.
Cool.
Go ahead, you can clap.
Yeah, you know I'm pulling it up. Okay.
Nice and loud.
Yeah, okay, I got it. All right, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm extremely excited to be here today and presenting Setting Sun Circle's upcoming project, and it's their first graphic novel, and it's titled The Downwinder. My name is Tokala Tatum. I'm from the Yakima tribe out of Yakima, Washington, from the George family out of White Swan, Washington. And I come from the Rosebud Sioux tribe out of Rosebud, South Dakota, on my father's side, Yakima on my mother's side. I'm a graduate from the University of Washington and a writer and film director, and I am the writer and creator of The Downwinder. And yeah. And unfortunately not joined with us today is the second half of this project. Their name is Roy Alexander. They're a multidisciplinary creative, meaning they do all sorts of things. They're also an employee at Setting Sun Circle, and they're the illustrator and co-creative director of The Downwinder. And today I get to give you guys just a full deep dive into what this graphic novel is and what it can offer, and especially keeping it focused. I got a really potent message to share with you guys when it comes to the education sector of it and what I think what I know it could potentially do in terms of innovation with reaching the youth. So let's begin. The actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. It's a sentence that simply speaks for itself, and it also bleeds into many different avenues of life. Education being one of them, community, parenthood, family, environmental advocacy. The actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. This is the theme, or the armature that we call it, the skeletal structure that the Downwinder lies on. And with that being said, the Downwinder revolves around three different aspects, and I'll get more into this in detail. It's not limited to these three different aspects. As you see, this is going to be a very, very big and ambitious project that I'm super excited about. But the three main aspects being the Yakima people, the Columbia River in Chiwana in Yakima-Ichishkin language, and the Hanford nuclear site. And for any of you who don't know, the Hanford nuclear site was the world's first full-scale plutonium production reactor right along the Columbia River, which aided in building the atomic bomb that was used in World War II. And also, for those that you don't know, the Hanford nuclear site, throughout its production, ended up becoming the most contaminated site in the Western Hemisphere. And so with that being said, with the Hanford nuclear site being, mic check here, with the Hanford nuclear site being along the Columbia River is home to many different people, not just the Yakima. We also have the Wanapum people, many different river peoples, and even today, it's home to even more non-Indigenous people. It's home to many different people. And even beyond that, the Columbia River has become a resource to the entire world. And so this story focusing on these three elements and bleeding beyond is what this story really relies on. But beyond all of this story aims to share a universal message beyond just for Indigenous people, but just youth in general and humans of the whole world, but it's for those beyond our reach. And it's to learn how to move, how to question, and how to protect when something potentially harmful begins to encroach upon the land. And I feel like that feels like a message that's more timely than ever when we're thinking about the AI industry and people are talking about building AI data centers along the river and things of that nature. And this type of universal message, a message that can bleed beyond different generations, becoming timeless in itself is what we aim to do with this story. And so as you journey with me through the Downwinder, as I break this down, you'll see that the means that we do this is really youth-focused and really innovative through the means of modern popular culture and inspiration, through the likes of anime and manga, which I'll kind of talk about how that kind of bleeds into how this story goes beyond to break barriers. And so yeah, now we could get into the fun part and understand what this is about. So the Downwinder. I'll read you guys the synopsis real quick, but it's a young man with the ability to transform into water hops from job to job along the Columbia River, running from his past and the mythical monster of the Columbia, befriending others along the way, learning that his mysterious connection to the water goes deeper and will affect generations beyond his reach. So that's what our story is about in one paragraph, and this story takes place in 1957. So it's a great opportunity to bring the audience to a different time period and really immerse them into something that they haven't seen before. And with that being said, it revolves around three different huge historical moments, one of them being Celilo Falls. I don't know if any of you guys know about Celilo Falls, but for our native peoples, it was our sacred fishing site. I was talking to Daryl Hilaire, the CEO of Setting Sun Circle, when I was creating this story, and what he told me was that Celilo Falls back in the day was considered the Walmart of the Columbia River, where people from all over would come together and barter and trade and things of that nature. And Celilo Falls flooded in 1957, and it's been gone ever since. And so this story also revolves around the Dow's Dam, which was built in 1957, which flooded Celilo Falls. What was also in 1957 was the Hanford nuclear site was at the height of its production, producing plutonium during the Cold War. And so basing this in this time period with these three factors, the cultural, the historical, the environmental advocacy, that's all in there, is why 1957 is the time period. And our main character up here who could transform into water, his name's Archie Adams. He comes from the Yakima tribe, but he's raised by the Wanapum people. And yeah, you mind if I get a switch out?
That might be Diane.
Yeah, mic check, okay. But yeah, Archie Adams, who could transform into water, is Yakima, 18-year-old Yakima kid, but raised by the Wanapum, who's the river people they're another native tribe along the Columbia River. And so that's our main character, but with his ability to transform into water, there's a big consequence there where he leaves a trail of toxic goo behind his every step as he goes on a journey of learning that his impact will affect generations beyond his reach. Beyond that, we have our main monster here called Nushla. Nushla in Yakima Chiskin actually means monster, and in Yakima folklore, the monster is this is an adaptation of some of those cultural stories that talks about Nushla. And in this one, the monster wakes up with a mysterious sickness and comes back to wreak havoc on the land. But beyond that, we have some of our other characters. We have Spilye. Spilye is the trickster coyote, the shapeshifter coyote, which shows up in many different indigenous cultures. And in Yakima, Spilye is the name for our trickster coyote. And in this story, Spilye shows up in the form of a superhero. And Spilye, both in folklore and in this story, knows the land like no other. He's been all over, done many different things. Spilye's taken down dams. Spilye built the Columbia River with his own hands. I mean, just tons of stories that Spilye has done. But beyond that, since Nushla comes back with this mysterious sickness, it requires Spilye to join on Archie's journey, along with some friends of his own. So we have Anahui, who is the grizzly bear, and Lutzatlipa, which is the red fox. And those are also two shapeshifters and superheroes that show up in this story. And lastly, with our last part of the characters, we have the boat crew. As I mentioned, this takes place in 1957. The Columbia River has been industrialized since it was found, pretty much by the people that came across it. And so as Archie hops from job to job along the Columbia River, he comes across a boat crew, and they end up taking a job with Hanford. So we have our first character, Fred, who's an older white gentleman who's worked the entire industrialization of the Columbia River. He's helped build the Grand Coulee Dam in the 30s, the Dow's Dam in the 50s, and even worked with Hanford in between. Beyond that, we have Peggy, who is a fisherwoman from Celilo Village, which is another band of native people along the Columbia River. along with her nephew Richard. And when Celilo Falls floods, her being a fisherwoman, in our culture, a lot of people talked about that time as it was the day the world ended, because it was so sacred to us, and when it flooded, it's been gone forever. And so Peggy and Richard end up joining this boat crew trying to escape a world that they think is dying, which in Native culture, that's very prevalent in real life. A lot of us have had to leave the reservation or where we come from because we felt like the world that we knew once was dying. But beyond that, we have an incredibly diverse cast. Our last character is Johnny Boy. And Johnny Boy is a Japanese American. And Johnny Boy's family left back to Japan after they were let out of the internment camps in World War II. And that's a part of American history that I don't think really gets talked about enough. And when I was putting this story together, being inspired by Japanese pop culture, being inspired by anime, being inspired by manga, Japanese Americans also have a very prevalent history in the state of Washington itself. It felt like having that Asian American representation and that Japanese American representation specifically had to be in this story. And with that being said, Johnny Boy is actually a huge character in our story and carries forward our supporting plot, which is our tragedies don't define us, which goes back to the armature: the actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. So those are the two messages that we're aiming to share with this book. And those are the characters who help do it. So hopefully as we've gotten to this point, you can kind of understand that there's a lot to this story that's kind of hard to break down as fast as I just did it, I guess. But firing on all cylinders, that's what this story does. And so we have some examples of the artwork. You can see some of the examples up here on the table. We have Celilo Falls right there in all its beauty and glory before it was flooded in 1957. We also have one of our opening chapter pages up here. And this is chapter 1 of 7. We have 7 chapters, which is a very significant number and meaning in Yakima culture, many different indigenous cultures. Beyond that, we actually have some language in here. Nash is how you say it, the number 1. And so these are kind of 3 big aspects that I think add a lot to the education of this book and what it could potentially offer to the youth and just readers in general. We have the cultural, the historical, and even the linguistic. And adding language in that, like I said, this story adds a lot of different perspectives and hopes to break barriers beyond just reaching in our indigenous communities, but it could be a resource for everyone. And adding language in there just to bring a breath of authenticity, so when readers, they don't shy away from the book because it feels a little too foreign. It's just enough in there, teach you some basic words and let you feel and see the world as the characters do. And with our team, I feel pretty confident in saying that what we're creating with this project is something that I don't think has ever been done before. I truly believe that. And so to take a quick pause and make sure we highlight our team, this is our team. We have Monica Paula Rodriguez, who is our assistant illustrator, and she's from Puerto Rico. And yeah, we're right there. Yeah, she's from Puerto Rico, and she's our assistant illustrator. She has an extremely illustrious career. We're so blessed to have her on the project. She's worked on projects like Marvel, Miles Morales, who is a Puerto Rican character in the Marvel universe. She's done huge brand campaigns. She's just a purebred professional, which is super happy to have her on the team. We also have Michael Sekakwaptawa, who I really want to highlight here because Michael Sekakwaptawa is the other Yakima member on our team, and he's our assistant illustrator. And he's done a lot of work. We have our poster over here, and Michael helped design the logo for the Downwinder. Michael also designed that opening chapter page with the 7 drums, that number 7 that I was talking about. And being able to work with Michael and collaborate with him on what I was aiming to do with the culture and make this product just authentic from every single page, even the chapter pages, even the logo. Being able to work with him and his cultural knowledge, he's a little older than me, so he really understands it, could take it to the next level. He's been a great resource in terms of that. We have Buddy Beaudoin, who's a professional letterer and he's our letterer for our comic book. Letterer meaning he's the one that adds the text bubbles and the sound effects to the comic book, from upstate New York. Does extremely great work. And then we have Chag Lowry. Not sure if any of you have heard of Chag Lowry, but Chag Lowry is an author and a graphic novel creator as well. And he's our project consultant. He's the author of the award-winning Soldiers Unknown, which is a graphic novel about the native soldiers who were drafted into World War I before they were even considered US citizens. And he's our project consultant on this, just helping us get to the finish line. Me, this is my first time being a published author. Roy, my creative partner up here, this is his first time being a published illustrator. Just him knowing those little details on what it takes to make a book like this has been an incredible help. And then we have Roy Alexander, who is our lead illustrator and co-creative director. I'm definitely excited to share with you guys a little bit about our synergy and how we create this story together and how we've gotten started together on projects such as this one. Roy, like I said, is a multidisciplinary creative. He's an actor, he's a musician, he illustrates, he does it all. He's also an employee at Setting Sun Circle. Me, myself, like I said, I come from the University of Washington. I come from Yakima, Washington. I committed myself to wanting to be a storyteller in all assets, and it's something that I've just fallen in love with, from film to graphic novels, comic books, you name it. Something that I'm extremely passionate about and I'm working towards every day to turn it into a career, and just want to be a master storyteller. I also want to be an educator and be able to teach the youth the power of storytelling. And as I get more into the educational aspects, I'm just laying the groundwork of what this book is, and then I could break down to you guys what I think this offers in terms of innovative thinking. But yeah, this is our team. And speaking of Roy and I being the two halves on this project, here's an example of what the process or production actually looks like on a book such as this one. And so obviously we have our script. It's just a cool little insight to see how it goes from script to the thumbnails to the final artwork. And before we actually get to that moment, before you actually reach writing anything on the script, obviously a story like this requires a ton of research. And being able to work with Setting Sun Circle, we were able to schedule interviews for me to go back home to my community and talk to elders, and just reading a ton of books and learning about Hanford, learning about Celilo Falls, and really ultimately just getting a peek into that time period. Me being a young person and being inspired by modern influence and understanding what it was like back then, to be able to bring it to the youth so they could understand how this world has changed and how we could see and witness different patterns, and hopefully that we can intercept them now as more problems come up for the next generation. And so as I dive through that process of research and start working on my story structure, trying to understand what I want to say, what it really comes down to is, how I like to describe it, is you're trying to build a container. And so when I'm showing you like these superhero characters and transforming into water and this monster, it's really trying to understand what I'm trying to say and build in that container. Container meaning like the genre, like an action adventure story, what type of book it is, where it's a graphic novel akin to like Japanese manga, anime, stuff like that. And you're building this container so it can help elevate your story. And so once you have that, your brain could kind of flourish with all these ideas and be able to run rampant and create as you want to. And so Roy and I's synergy has, this is our second comic book that we're working together. And so once I go through that research process and the story structure, we get to the script, and when I'm writing the script, I write it panel by panel. And the reason I write it panel by panel is because I already knew Roy was going to be the illustrator for this book. And so when you know the person's art style, something that doesn't really get talked a lot about in comic books, then that really creates a connection there. And I really believe it when you look at this type of artwork. The type of feedback we usually get from people is it just feels like there's something there. People usually see that Celilo Falls picture and they just instantly see it. And I really do believe it's because of that synergy between Roy and I, and how when I was creating the story, it was already in mind for how he illustrates. And to give a quick story, especially revolving around Setting Sun Circle. Setting Sun Circle used to be Children of the Setting Sun before the rebrand. And I'm 26 years old now. I worked with Setting Sun Circle when I was 22 years old for the first time. And I got brought on as a production assistant for one of their film productions. And that's where I met Roy. And oftentimes when you're on a film set working as a production assistant, oftentimes you're just sitting around waiting for something to do, waiting for your name to get called. It's kind of like you're waiting to get subbed into a basketball game, just sitting on the bench. And that's pretty much what me and Roy were doing. At the time when I first met Roy, he had his iPad with him. He pulled out his iPad and he started showing me his comic book illustrations, showing me his ideas. I'm like, all right, so I pull out my phone, I start showing him my scripts and my films and my story ideas. That was about 4 years ago, kind of go our separate ways, Roy being an employee here. Me, I go work on different projects and become a writer and a film director. And then all of a sudden we get pitched this idea to create a graphic novel with the company. And that's kind of how we got started. And so that's what I think a company like Setting Sun Circle, I mean, that type of collaboration, two young Native people who are inspired by the world around them and want to add our voice to the mix, and we got stories to tell, and we're inspired through other types of stuff like that. And Setting Sun Circle is a place, I mean, you guys saw the video with the building and people talking about it. That's the type of place where we can mix together like that and make things like this happen. And so when you get to, so just giving you guys a sneak peek into the production, and I know you guys probably don't care about that type of stuff, but before you get there, what I'm super passionate about is obviously the storytelling aspect and what it could handle to the youth. And first, you have to understand what you want to say. When I'm talking about building that container, when I'm talking about this story structure, research, I have to understand what I want to say. The actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. That's a message, like I said, as timely as ever. And before you get to that part, you have to understand what the purpose of a story is. And stories ultimately are the passing of survival information. That's why stories are so potent in human civilization. That's why stories have passed from civilization to civilization, from culture to culture. It's because when stories are passing on crucial survival information, they end up oftentimes having a lot longer lifespan than even the storyteller themselves. And one of the examples that I've learned from one of my teachers, his name's Brian McDonald, he's local to Seattle as well. He talks about it in terms of this example of children. Oftentimes when you tell children that it's story time, they get super giddy and excited, almost like they're being fed. But that's because they are, because children are new to this world. And when you're telling them stories, they're getting excited because they're intaking new information, new survival information, new information of how they see the world, how other people interact with it. And so getting to that point, it's that container I was talking about is understanding how do you pass on that information, who's your target demographic and what are you trying to say, et cetera. And for me, ultimately, it came down to this term called the Hanford Reach, bringing it back to the Hanford nuclear site. There's this term that's used called the Hanford Reach, and I think that's a term that's used a lot when it comes to nuclearization and just nuclear anything, is this type of reach. They kind of talk about it, especially when we're talking like worst to worst, when they're talking about nuclear power and arms and stuff like that. They usually talk about it in terms of sectors. Like this area is extremely bad. You don't want to be in this area around nuclear energy. Outer ring, still bad. Outer ring, kind of bad. And ultimately, when I was understanding what I wanted to say, I wanted to do the inverse of that through land, community, people, water, in a positive way. And so, before I got there, it came down to my elders, going back to the research process and talking to the people that came before me. One of them being, I didn't get the chance to talk to him because he passed away in 2018. Never got the chance to meet him, but his name's Russell Jim. And Russell Jim is a Yakima knowledge scholar, a cultural guardian, and an environmental activist. And Russell Jim, when I was originally brought this story from the company, that was the main conversation. as I was preparing to create this story, and I was talking to some of my elders back home and doing this research process, it came to me eventually that the target demographic, especially in terms of education, is the target demographic when you're trying to reach the youth. Bridging that gap is extremely crucial. I think that's a moment in education that gets missed a lot when it comes to how are we actually reaching the youth, how are we actually communicating with them. And so in that moment, I understood the best way to get this story to the youth would be through the fictional sense. And when I was talking to my elders, I kind of realized that in our native cultures as native people and learning from my elders, we naturally kind of have this sort of humbleness to us, quietness to us. And I think that comes from us understanding that we're extensions of the land. Another elder of mine, his name's Rex Buck, he comes from the Wanapum people, it's right along the Columbia River. And oftentimes Rex Buck would talk about himself as nobody. He would describe himself as nobody. But the reason he said that was because he would say the land is somebody, and I'm just an extension of that land. And so when I was getting ready to put this story together, I understood that that's what my elders would tell me and were telling me. Don't tell a story about me, go tell a story about the land, go tell a story about the water, go tell a story about the culture, go bring our people back there, continue it. And that's where I ended up landing with this. And so then we reached this point of, okay, I'm telling you about these characters who transform in the water and Nestle the monster and things of that nature. It's why fiction? And fiction allows us to do a lot of things, and obviously it's figuring out, as I mentioned, reaching your target demographic, which is the youth. Why is it the youth? I mean, the answer is obvious, but if I had to pinpoint it to one reason, I believe it's because there's a disconnect happening as each generation goes on. And not just indigenous youth, but I'm talking youth in general. It's this disconnect that's happening between people and the land. And as each generation goes on, I noticed that getting farther and farther, even for myself, when I was growing up as a young child. I felt a huge disconnect from the land. Columbia River is a place where my people and my family come from since time immemorial. And even when I was growing up, it didn't feel like a place that I could go. It didn't feel like a place that was accessible to me. It felt like it was somebody else's. When you go there and it's industrialized all along the river and it's turned into a resource. And so that disconnect as generation goes on is something that I've really noticed is happening with just the youth of the world in general. And obviously when that happens, a lot of bad consequences usually follow suit. And so thinking about that message from the elders and wanting to continue that story and continue that fight and bring the people back to the land is how I ended up landing on doing this in a fictional sense. And what fiction allows us to do is, obviously I mentioned the aspects of history and culture and language, but environmental advocacy revolving around the Hanford nuclear site is one really big aspect. And for me, environmental advocacy comes down to one core principle, and it's building a holistic worldview. Because to me, when we usually run into environmental problems, it's usually when we get a little too tunnel visioned. We're a little too tunnel visioned on profit, technological advancement, politics. And so environmental advocacy is really bringing back that holistic, seeing all aspects of the land, all aspects of society and people. And when you think about that, it's like, okay, in this country, who has historically been one of the people who have historically been kept out of the conversation? Native people. That's part of the reason why me and Setting Sun Circle are up here talking to you guys, and you feel like we have something to value, because that's kind of changing now. We're trying to build a more holistic worldview. You guys are like, wait, maybe we should listen to the native peoples and see what they have to say. Maybe they do have something to offer. And so that's one aspect of adding a holistic worldview. The other aspect of a holistic worldview is story. Story is an extremely potent and valuable influence when it comes to building a holistic worldview. If you look at stories of any environmental advocacy, any moment in history, a war, a world war, etc., when you put it through the lens of a story, it fleshes it out completely, where it can relate back to the human experience. And that's ultimately what fiction allows us to do. And as I've said time and time again, aiming to connect one back to the land. And with that and native storytelling kind of bubbling up in the fictional sense, that's why I feel like a book like The Downwinder is really reaching what I like to call like a lightning in the bottle moment, where it just feels like it's firing on all cylinders, like I mentioned. But to reiterate, the overall goal of this book is to be a product of popular culture, being inspired by the likes of anime and manga. And I gotta pause on that aspect to explain to you guys what that actually means, because I'm sure you guys have heard that a lot, whether it's yourself, whether it's your siblings or children or grandchildren, nieces and nephews. You probably heard that a lot, that oh, they love anime, but I don't really understand it. But that's exactly the reason why it's so potent, because anime, coming from Japanese culture, is such a product of pop culture because it's always ahead of its time. It's always one step ahead of the culture, of society. And when that happens, oftentimes it comes across as unexplainable. If you ask anyone in your family, whether it's a kid or a sibling or whatever, to explain their favorite anime, they'll probably have a really hard time doing it, because the way they tell stories through that medium is it just has so many aspects to it. But that's because it's always ahead of its time. And with The Downwinder, being under Setting Sun Circle, that's something that we aim to do. Me and Roy, being two young Native people, adding our voice, adding our art, adding our style, our stories to the mix. You know, oftentimes we hear this quote a lot nowadays that Natives are storytellers. Well, now it's time to show them. It's time to show them that we can also add our product to the mix and be a part of the conversation, and show people that our stories can hang with everyone else's too. And that's kind of what we aim to do, as I break down the story and the production and all of that stuff. And so as we reach the end of this presentation, to reiterate what this book is as a product, not a story, but like a product, something that you hold in your hand. This book is a fictional story of the Columbia River and its history, to cultivate an appreciation of the water, the life it provides, and the impact we have on it. Rooted in Yakima mythology and culture, this book is by Yakima, for Yakima, by Salmon people, for Salmon people, and by humans, for humans, because all of human life has benefited from the immense exploitation of the Columbia River. And you can see that inverse in effect right there when I'm talking about the nuclearization. They talk about it in sectors, bad, bad, bad. This is that inverse where it's by Yakima, for Yakima, by Salmon people, for Salmon people, and by humans, for humans, aiming to invite everyone to the story. And that's something that I wanna hone on when it comes to the education sector. There's this quote that's used a lot in different instances, and it's this quote of meet people where they're at. And I think that's a quote that needs to be applied to the youth even more, because like I said, that disconnect happening and that gap happening, understanding that in the education sector, for educators to be curious about different ways that we can reach the youth and show them this history, because this history isn't being taught. This culture isn't being taught. The environmental aspects, they're trying to be taught, but I'm telling you, even me growing up as a young person, it's not quite translating yet. And I think it's because we're at a point in time where we need to innovate a little bit more and be more curious about that. And that's something that I don't think The Downwinder has all the answers to the problems, but I do think it has an aspect to it that can hopefully show people what we could possibly do, because now we're in a point in time where it feels like we're having a lot more problems pop up than we do have answers. And I feel like for educators specifically to be curious on that front and look to the young people who are ambitious and hungry and sometimes angry about the world and want to try to fix it too, to listen to them about what type of ideas they have. And so yeah, the actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. The one thing they say is the best teacher is a lifelong student. And that's probably the one thing I'd like to leave with you guys. But the Downwinder, I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. It's coming really soon. We're almost done with the book. It's coming out in this year, 2026. We've been working really hard on it. And hopefully everything I just showed you guys is just one. It's just a small example of what this book has to offer. So I hope you guys will journey with us, and anyone you know is interested when the Downwinder releases. Thank you.
Holy wow. Can we give... That's my first time seeing that presentation too. It's like, holy. Yeah, a little bit of the offerings we're doing at Setting Sun Circle, and I just really raised my hands to Tokala and Roy and the whole crew that are coming together to make this happen. And once again, it was kind of a blessing that we had a funder that is that interested in the issues related to the Hanford nuclear site, and also like you said, empowering Indigenous voices. Any questions about this? Go ahead. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I really can't wait to read this once it comes out. As someone who really loves comics.
Yeah, perfect.
I was curious, could you walk us through the thought process of why you decided to have your protagonist have the power to shapeshift into water? Because that's an unusual power. I think in DC, there's the Wonder Twins. One of them does that, and then there's this villain in Static Shock, Aquamarina. And so I'm just why? It obviously has some thematic resonances, but how did you come up with that? And how does that empower?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and yeah, the first thing being that sort of superpower turning into water. Yeah, I do think that is a really unique superpower that I don't think has been seen often in cartoons, comic books, etc. But when it comes to fleshing out this story, and again bringing it back to understand what I want to say, oftentimes what you want to do is you create characters that you're super in love with, and oftentimes you don't want them to go through anything hard. But in order to create a good story, that's exactly what you have to do. You have to make them, you have to drag them all the way into the dirt so they could come back up again. That's how you create a good story. And with Archie Adams having him turn into water, that was something where I knew it was going to force the character to have to look at himself in the mirror, especially when he turns in the water and he's leaving a trail of toxic goo. That's his journey. And having him have that story and having to make him face it rather than him witness it from someone else is a way to mirror that in the audience. So hopefully the audience can look at themselves and look at their environmental impact and things of that nature. So that's kind of how I ended up creating that superpower in the character. But yeah.
Great presentation, super excited to see when this comes up. Hats off to you, it's amazing.
Thank you.
I have some young people in my life that love anime. Is there a particular target audience for this graphic novel? This graphic novel, I would say, is definitely geared towards probably middle school age and up. This is a full graphic novel, meaning it's going to be 250 pages, a big book, 7 chapters, and so it's really like a full chapter book type of feel. And so having it be like a middle school age and up, and then obviously, anime and comic books. And me, I'm 26 years old, and that's all I watch is cartoons. And so having it just be for everyone above that. And that's also the thing that I love about comic books, is because even before that, oftentimes as a young kid, if you can't really grasp the story quite yet, if you're younger than that middle school age, graphic novels are still just a great thing where kids just like to flip the pictures, see the pictures, see the characters, see the water, see the land, and eventually you get old enough to read that story. And that's a great example of myself included. There's certain stories where I was too young and just flipping through the pictures, and then I'm like,
22 years old and I go back to it, I'm like, wow, this is an amazing story. And so, but yeah, focusing on that target demographic, like middle school age and up, middle school to high school, I think is like a perfect age range that this book is kind of geared towards. Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. No, yep, yeah. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah.
My name's Tracy. This is so amazing. And so I'm imagining that there are going, because this really follows along with required curriculum, I'm wondering if you have a pre-order list, because I can imagine schools and classes are going to be wanting classroom sets, not just one or two.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, that might be your answer over there. In terms of pre-order stuff, I don't really have too much information on that. But yeah, hopefully, being under Setting Sun Circle, I think they mentioned getting an email list together, and having Setting Sun Circle help support us. We're gonna make sure that stuff gets to everyone it needs to. So I don't think you have to be worried about being notified about that stuff. We'll definitely make sure that it gets to the people who it needs to, for sure. We're definitely working on that front a lot, definitely. Yeah.
That's one of your aunties.
Oh yeah.
Another Yakima out here.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
So would you be able to, of course, I don't know your capacity, but if there is opportunity for like interdisciplinary certifications for like high school, I feel like David would have more attention span, but to do maybe like a history/art presentation for high schoolers, would that be something you're open to bring you in so students can see kind of how they can build in storytelling, build in artwork, and then apply it and tie that into curriculum that we're seeing in public school settings?
Yeah, that aspect. I kind of spoke on it during the presentation, but myself personally, I mean, just being the writer and created this story, but I just mentioned, storytelling is just something that I believe in so much, and I consider that's something I'm trying to reach, is to become like a master storyteller one day. And so in terms of having, the opportunities to pass on what I know and what I've learned from other people to the youth, so they can learn about crafting their own story from where they come from. Yeah, definitely. There's no way that could be passed up ever. So if you ever want to talk more about it, yeah, feel free. For sure.
Any other questions?
I'm really struck by the quote, "If you help me say it, what your hands do today."
Yep. Yeah, that the actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. Yep.
The most powerful moments I've had, I work with teenagers, the most powerful moments I've had with teenagers has been when we talk about alignment, where they are able to articulate what it is they want, whatever that is. And then we talk about, at any given moment, if you think about what you're saying, is it in alignment with what it is you said you want or what you want to be known for? At any moment, are your thoughts in favor or aligned with what it is you said you want or what you want to be in this world? And then what you're doing at any moment. Those have been some of the most powerful moments that I've had with students. And a lot of my students also love anime and manga, and I think that you hit the nail on the head when you said it's just beyond what pop culture is doing currently, and I think you helped me realize why that is. So you have this package now of keeping students in that zone of wanting to know more because manga is just on that cutting edge, and then you have the big so what of getting them to think about alignment with your character and leaving a trail of toxicity, which is not what he wants to do.
Yep.
I think probably he realizes that in the story.
Yeah.
And this package, like when you say firing on all cylinders, I think that's what's happening in my mind as I think about everything you said in relation to this quote. And I gotta get you, if possible, in front of my students.
Yeah,
I'm local. You're in
Okay.
Bellingham.
Yeah. No, yeah.
So
Close enough.
I wanted to say all that because a simple thank you wasn't going to get it. I wanted to let you know what I'm thankful for. And it's the cylinders, it's the firing, it's this. And I'm just struck and inspired.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Yeah, that aspect of that want, that's actually a big portion in terms of story structure when you're creating a story like this. The first thing you figure out is what does your character want? And then once your character gets that want, what's the consequence with that? And to share you guys a little bit more about the story, Archie Adams, I mentioned that Celilo Falls floods because of the Dalles Dam. And at the very beginning of the story, Archie has this superpower he could turn into water, and he's an 18-year-old teenager, so he loves it, and he just wants to be in the water. And so he goes into the water in 1957, and he leaves that trail of toxic goo. And when he does, that toxic goo attracts Nushla the monster. And Nushla the monster comes to the Dalles Dam, and the Dalles Dam ends up getting started immediately and ends up flooding Celilo Falls a lot earlier than expected. And that's instantly Archie realizing the actions your hands take will affect generations beyond your reach. So it's kind of an example of how a character, you figure out what they want, give them that want, but what comes with that. And then that's that journey of, you got to take your character through it in order to bring them back up. So yeah, it's the journey. So yeah, thank you a lot for your words. That means a lot.
Nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.